All right, everyone. Donald Trump is planning to ease some of the rules with regards to federal workers, making it possible to fire them if they are inept, fire them if their position is not necessary. In general, act like any other employer does, which is, hey, if someone's not doing their job, or there's no job to be done, or their job is inefficiently done, where we're fiddling around with how people work, people can actually be fired because of this. Government, unfortunately, though, has a difficulty where it really is incapable of firing anyone. Some federal worker will be, because of the way in which the bureaucratic regulatory structure works, can only be let go of after a huge amount of effort. Most presidents aren't going to go through that effort, and this is probably a preface to actually firing some people. Good. Make these bureaus do more with less. Cut 10% off of all their budgets across the board and see what happens. And then that'll certainly help with the deficit. Look, here's the thing. There are a few necessary functions for a federal government or for any governing body. You can return some of that ability to the states. And then you also have a great deal that government does that really isn't necessary. It might be nice, it might be family-friendly sounding, it might be, fluffy words, the Bureau of Family Tolerance and Happiness or something. What does it do? Who knows? Nobody can even trudge through the opaque nature of a bureau half the time and figure out most of what they're up to. For instance, we've got multiple overlapping intel agencies that do the same thing, like the NSA spies on everything. And the FBI also spies on people. The CIA spies on people. FEMA probably spies on people. The IRS certainly does data sharing and data gathering of its own. So you've got multiple overlapping agencies where you have people who have the job description that really is the same as if they were working in a different agency. They might even be working on the same thing simultaneously without fucking realizing it. That's not efficient. Then you have bureaus, like they say the Department of Education. What's the point of the Department of Education? Fiddling around trying to figure out how to improve an educational structure that the federal government really shouldn't have anything to do with in the beginning anyway. And they do a shit poor job, but No Child Left Behind, what a wonderful time that was. Common Core, all this other bullshit, it never works. The school lunch program, we're going to have new federal standards for school lunches that Trump thankfully ripped apart. And it was so dumb. And it doesn't work. It's central. You can't centralize every fucking thing in the world and expect anything to work efficiently. But in order to fix this problem, you have to be able to actually fire people, because that is going to be a requirement. What I would say is most of the bureaus shouldn't exist. Those that are truly necessary, in some cases, could be done by private entities within a private marketplace so that taxpayers don't have to subsidize them. It's easier to do things at the local or state level because there are big differences between people's needs from state to state. Like when you try to make federal standards on anything, barring, certain rudimentary things like, you can't whip your workers. You can't send dudes into the heavy construction zone without giving them the opportunity to use a fucking helmet. Workers shall not smoke at the gas station or something. With the exception of certain things like that are for the mass benefit of the public in general, or for workers in general, federal workers, private sector, doesn't matter. With the exception of certain regulations, like certain aspects of environmental regulations, workers' rights, things that provide a lattice structure upon which society can function without people being totally screwed over, most regulations and bureaucracy is not strictly necessary. Private businesses should do what needs to be done but doesn't need to be done by a government. States should do what they can do, or even local government when possible, to make it more efficient and more tailored to the people's needs in the region. Otherwise, it should just be abolished entirely. You're going to have to fire a lot of people. You could probably fire half the government workers in the country. By the way, statistically, there are a number of U.S. federal workers that are subscribers of mine. I'm sorry, I hate to say this, but there's a possibility that I want you to lose your job, yes. Big government makes big taxes and big mistakes, and your job may not be necessary. And if it is, work in the private sector. If the federal government's not doing it, you'd become a state worker. If they're not doing it, you'd become a private sector employee. Only after that, if there's still no compelling reason for anyone to want to do the same work, then your job disappears. Yeah, for some of you that would definitely be true. Yeah, sorry to say, because some people be like, oh well, Sticks wants Americans to lose their jobs. That would be the BuzzFeed title of the article. No, I'm saying is that those jobs should be private sector if they're necessary, whenever possible. Of course, you can't have the private sector doing all the intel, the data gathering. Not that Facebook doesn't try. They get in trouble for that. The government, the only reason that the government went after Zuckerberg and is like leading on Facebook is they want to be the only ones that have that data. They're like, oh, you're not supposed to sell the data. You're not supposed to use it for productive purposes that might actually prop up a job and generate any form of revenue. No, you're just supposed to store it on a poorly secured server like we do at the FBI or at the NSA. A poorly secured server that people can hack into routinely. And yeah, we might accidentally give all Americans personal deep intel to China or something, but that's the way to do it. Facebook's doing it wrong because it's a private company. We're uncomfortable with this, until they absorb Facebook, make it a government bureau, I guess. They would love to do that too. I agree with this general concept of making it easier, more streamlined to fire people. It shouldn't take months and multiple reviews to fire someone who doesn't do their job. In some cases, you've got government workers that are paid basically to sit there. There have been cases. It's not particularly common. The Republicans made a big stink about this, I think, during their re-election campaign for Obama, and also during the midterms. They're like, oh, there are federal workers that are like, they can't do they can't be fired, but they're also technically a criminal, and so they can't actually do anything, and so they're literally paid to sit there. Or they're being paid while they're sitting in a cell. These people are paid to sit there and watch TV 6 days a week. And they still get their paychecks. They're going to get their pensions too. Yeah, and that's the other component. Make it easier to do away with pensions. No, and no government worker should get a pension. I would be a total stickler. I hate to sound brutal. Well, no, I don't. But no government worker, no politician, no judge, no bureau employee, no head of some agency. They shouldn't get a pension. If they're not doing their actual, look, these people already get an inflated salary. If you're responsible with your money, and I know that doesn't go hand in hand with anything involving the government, and we all know that, if you're prudent with your spending habits, and you've got a job where for the next 10 years you're going to make $250,000 a year, yeah, you can probably afford to retire, get into the private sector, you invest a little bit. If you're living beyond your means, like, you're snorting the DC Coke, so to speak, yeah, I can see that'd be a problem. You need that pension to keep up your Coke and champagne lifestyle, I guess. Well, who cares about your Coke and champagne? The taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for your vices, which is fundamentally what they have to do. People who aren't even at work, this is what screwed Detroit. Detroit's final stage of stupidity really has to do with government pensions. It really has to do with city pensions for city workers, and it doesn't work so well now, does it? When you have an inflated bureaucratic system and high pensions, because Detroit was doing well, trying to attract the best and brightest, because we're the Paris of the West. How funny that is. Yeah, it's the Paris of the West, and it's beginning to look more and more like actual Paris. They're beginning to become quite similar. Yeah, many, many ways. Now Detroit's bankrupt, and it's perpetually bankrupt. No, they think that things are going well now, despite the fact that the population continues to decline. Eventually things will even out because it's like a libertarian paradise, so to speak. It's like, oh, $10? Yeah, you can buy this whole city block. You can't build anything there without a street gang coming and burning it to the ground or something, and nobody wants to live there. But you can have land. They're starting to try urban farming there. Like, oh, we're going to raise cows in the middle of Detroit. Beavers have come back to their waterways for the first time in over 100 years. Not a joke. That was a report from like 3 years ago. So, the private market shall save them. That's about all. Peace out.